In a previous video linked below, I talked about the circumstances where you're required by law to purchase a TV license. In this video, I'm going to talk about what happens if you don't have a TV license and you are being chased to buy one. But first of all, if you're new to me, I'm a barrister who helps you understand law. So make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell and turn on all notifications. I do many posts that you might find of interest. And if you leave comments or questions below, they might find their way into a new video on here or over at Black Belt Secrets, where I answer your questions left in the comments. So I'm going to assume that you've watched my previous video, or if you haven't, that you're going to watch it afterwards, and I will link it at the end of this video, so make sure you watch till the end. And we'll take the scenario where you do not have a TV license, but maybe you do have a TV, but you've watched my video, you've looked at all the rules, and you've concluded that you don't need a TV license, but you get letter after letter from TV licensing insisting that you might need one and that you might need to buy one. I will say at the outset that this video is in no way intended to encourage anybody who does require a TV license to avoid paying it for any reason whatsoever. As usual with my videos, there is a short version and a long version. The short version is you can simply ignore these letters and tell any visiting agents to leave your property. The caveat there being quite an important one, because there are potential criminal consequences, is that if there is a warrant issued by a magistrate or a sheriff in Scotland to search the premises because there's a reasonable suspicion that an offence has been committed, i.e. you're watching TV without a licence, then it may amount to an offence to obstruct the lawful execution of said warrant. And as an addendum to that caveat, this would also apply if there was a fine levied by a magistrate for failure to pay a TV licence and a magistrate has issued a fine. However, in the absence of a warrant, there is no lawful authority for TV licensing agents to enter your property without permission. And this includes if there is a locked gate at the front. If the gate is locked, then the implied right of access stops at that point because it is a locked gate. And it is this implied right of access that makes this whole situation quite interesting. You see, anybody who has a genuine business with the occupier of a property has an implied right of access to walk up to that property, knock the door, or ring the bell. But such as is the case with most implied rights, this implied right can be revoked. It can be revoked in a number of ways. You can simply tell somebody to get off your property. You could be very specific and tell them that you have revoked their implied right of access to your property. Or it could be executed by way of a sign on the front of your property or outside on the gate, or even as a standalone sign. The revocation of the implied right of access to a property is a principle which has been upheld in court in a very interesting case involving drink driving, which is going to be my next video. So make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell to receive that video. In essence, when somebody visits your property on an implied right of access and you ask them to leave, they become a trespasser if they refuse to leave your property. As such, anything they do thereafter may itself become unlawful and potentially inadmissible. Worse still, if aggressive words are used to encourage the occupier to let them in when they've been asked to leave, this may amount to assault through fear of harm, because this does not require physical battery. There is also, in my view, a strong argument that if the officer is wandering about the property, say to look through windows, which is not the front door, then this is not covered by the implied right of access, because the implied right of access is only to visit the property to speak to the occupier about bona fide, genuine business. Dealing with some practicalities which I've talked about in a few videos, evidence is everything. If you wanted to bring a complaint or a claim or simply rebut any accusations against you, the more documentary evidence you have, the better. For example, if you have CCTV on your home, such as a Google Nest or a Ring device, which will capture and record video evidence of everything that is done and said whilst someone is visiting your property, this is the best kind of evidence because it will record and capture the evidence as it unfolds. Failing that, of course, you can use your mobile phone or any other camera device to record everything done and said, both by yourself as the occupier and by any visiting agent. You will not need permission or consent of the visiting agent to record the entire event. However, if you are being recorded by a visiting agent, particularly if you've asked him or her to leave, then there are potentially arguments with respect to a breach of your right to privacy in your own home because you've asked them to leave and revoked the implied right of access. If you don't have access to any kind of camera to record the event, then perhaps you can simply write things down, write down every single word that is said, both by yourself and by the visiting agent. Each of these can then become evidence in any kind of complaint or claim thereafter. Matters will be made worse if you attempt to close the door and the agent prevents you from doing so with force. You're perfectly entitled to close the door and not talk to the agent at all. As I said, unless there is a search warrant in place, which they must show to you along with their identification. The agent should not attempt to force their way into your property, and if they do, again without a search warrant, you are entitled to use equal and/or reasonable force to prevent them from doing so, and even removing them from your premises, so long as you've made it clear that their implied right of access has been revoked. They become a trespasser, and you can use reasonable force to remove a trespasser from your property. However, in scenarios like this, I would recommend that you call the police and you tell them that you have made it clear that they are to leave your property and refusing to do so. In terms of what to say to a visiting agent, I cannot really recommend any particular wording, because if you say something that misconstrues the facts or wrongly leads the agent to believe that you do need a TV license, even if in fact you don't, then that would become part of a record, perhaps to obtain a search warrant or perhaps even to prosecute you, which would be particularly bad in the event that you actually don't need a TV license, but something you've said gives reason to believe that you do. And there is, of course, no obligation on you to answer any questions, even if you are cautioned. You do have the right to say absolutely nothing, ask the agent to leave, and close the door. But as I often recommend, a civil approach can work. Many people have completed the form online to declare that they do not need a TV license. Fill out the few short questions which will tell you whether or not you do need a TV license, and many of those people have never heard from TV licensing ever since. And as with any scenario, I would obviously recommend that you do not get angry, you do not raise your voice, you do not swear or shout at any visiting agent. You keep everything nice and polite and civil. Ask them to leave if you don't want them there, again presuming they don't have a warrant or a writ, and just close the door. The same can be said for letters that come through the post. There is no obligation on you to respond or even acknowledge these letters, but as I say, it may well be worth filling in the form online to declare that you do not need a TV license, because after all, whilst it remains a criminal offence, the burden is always on the prosecution to prove the case against you. And another thing I would say is don't simply pay the TV license out of fear that you will be prosecuted for not having one when you need one. Of course, you must check properly and thoroughly, and you cannot rely on this video as legal advice, but check thoroughly that you do not need a TV license, and if you really do not need a TV license, then don't pay it, simply because you're in fear of prosecution. And as I said, the revocation of the implied right of access to your property is a very interesting topic, which I'm going to follow up in another video in respect of drink driving, so make sure you subscribe and join me for that one. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and remember, stay humble and subscribe.